Time now for the Historic Racing News Podcast. Here is your host, Paul Tarsey.
Greetings, and I'm pleased you're able to join us because we've got all sorts of stuff on the November edition of the show. As always, we've got a wide variety of things to talk about, and we've been finding out all sorts of stories. Whilst this show isn't exclusively about the Scottish maestro, I have the pleasure and honour of my dear friend Jim Roller, who came over from the States for an 80th birthday party for our mutual friend Peter McNaughton, and very happy birthday, belated birthday, Peter McNaughton. But he came over for that, and Jim, you and I went to the Jim Clark Museum as part of the festivities, and that was a treat, wasn't it?
Oh my heavens, it's made it just almost a trip of a lifetime, because to be there with a group of friends, like-minded kind of petrol sniffers like you and I and Mr. Jurd, it was definitely a wonderful experience. I'd been there before, but not since the renovation. And what they have done with this building and this museum is just absolutely fantastic. And just the little hamlet, the village of Duns, is also worth a visit. There are a couple great pubs there, some outstanding food, and it is just a wonderful treat to see the history of this man, Jim Clark, who meant so much to all of us around the world, but certainly for folks from the United Kingdom and Scotland. He was an inspiration, and you really feel that when you visit the Jim Clark ruins in Duns. And I got to tell you, Paul Jurd, if you haven't been there, you really need to get up there.
Very, very much looking forward to it, to be quite honest. One of my favourite drivers, and I think anyone who doesn't put Jim Clark in their top 5 of all time doesn't know an awful lot about motorsport. But we're going to talk. We're going to talk a little bit later on, particularly about 1965, his season of seasons, when he drove anything and everything all over the world, usually against the best in the world, and had a fantastic level of success.
And you're going to come back and tell us all about that 1965 a bit later in the show, aren't you?
Very, very much. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, our visit to Duns was made all the better by the insights and the stories from a man called Kenny McLean, who is from the Jim Clark Museum. He showed us round. He showed us some of the stuff that perhaps if you just went in and walked around, you'd miss. So, well worth doing that. And when you go to the museum, take that opportunity, because he also shared some of his thoughts with us.
Kenny, we've had a wander around the museum, and we've had a fabulous museum. I have to say that
Thank you.
It's absolutely amazing to see what we can see. Cars, lots of memorabilia, and one of the things is the beginnings of the Jim Clark story, that everybody knows the high spots of Jim's life, but those early days, he did it just for fun, didn't he?
Absolutely. It was just something he did in his spare time. He got into it because his friends were doing it. It's not something that he grew up with, that his family were all racers, or that, he kind of had a passion through go-karting or anything like this. He always had an interest in motorsport as a boy, but he fell in with a group of farming friends, some of whom were amateur race drivers in their spare time. And he got into that scene, and then gradually, without really any intention, I suppose, he found that he was quite good at the driving as well as at the mechanical stuff. And from then on, through the later half of the 1950s, he did the racing for the group of friends, the Border Reivers team as it then became. Yeah. And of course, that's what set him up to join Lotus in 1960. So it's a story of kind of a lack of intention rather than kind of, someone being really driven on that this is what he always wanted to do. He sort of fell into it through happenstance, really, and turned out to be this amazingly talented natural driver.
It's
might never have known that otherwise.
It's amazing because nowadays Formula One drivers have to be in a go-kart when they're still an embryo, and that they have to do all of that because they're going to be in a Formula One car currently by the time they're 19 or 20. But the other thing is, if you're a wannabe Formula One driver in the UK now, if you come from the south of England, you've got Silverstone, you've got Brands Hatch, you've got Goodwood, you've got lots and lots of different circuits. Now, where we are here in Duns, that fabulous, fabulous countryside, but it's a bit light on the old motorsport.
Oh, that's certainly true. Jim had the advantages, I suppose, of two things. In his particular era, the Scottish racing circuits at the time were right on his doorstep. Charterhall, Winfield. So once he had got involved in racing the cars regularly for his group of friends and then the Border Reivers, there were a number of races they could go to literally just down the road. And the second aspect there was just, in those days you could buy a car and do a bit of work in it and you could just go and enter all manners of events. This group of friends could not only do a lot of events around Scotland, the north of England, but they would go to Spa.
Yeah.
They would go to Le Mans. In a way that obviously would be unthinkable now for safety reasons and regulations and finance, if nothing else. The fact that they could buy a car second hand off Billy Cotton, the big band leader, and then go and race it and achieve things. They could buy a Jaguar D-Type and go and be the first person ever to do 100 miles an hour average in a British sports car race. So it was a different world in that respect.
It was, and it's also interesting to see the span of the cars that Jim drove. That we talked about earlier on, the DBR1 Aston Martin that he drove for Border Reivers. Admittedly, it was a previous year's car that had been sold on by the factory, and the D-Type Jaguar also that Jim raced. And then here in the museum, you've got his Indy car, which is chalk and cheese different, and he just seems to have absorbed all that.
It's again a difference, I suppose, a different world, a different era of racing. That you think that someone now in the peak of Formula One are only doing Formula One.
Yeah.
In fact, they're not permitted to go and do lots of different championships in the 1 year. And we're talking about 2025 being the 60th anniversary of Jim winning the Formula One and the French and British Formula 2 and Tasman and Indy in the same year. And in fact, we had a great number of events at Goodwood a few weeks ago, some of them commemorating Jim. Well, Easter Monday in 1965, Jim went to Goodwood, and on the same afternoon, he won the Formula One race, the sports car race, and the saloon car race. So in this course of, 4, 5, 6 hours, he was in 3 different types of car, 3 different types of racing, and won all 3. And I mean, imagine that now, not just in the 1 month, not in the 1 week, not in the 1 weekend, but in the 1 afternoon, to be in 3 totally different types of race car.
But
to win.
It was also at a time when Formula One drivers were not well paid. So it isn't that it was just the love of the sport, is it? It's that it was 50 quid for driving a Lotus Cortina and it was 75 quid for driving in Formula 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that it was what they did because they had to earn a living.
That was it. I mean, now we talk about the Formula One World Championship being so much bigger than it ever was, 24, 25 races a season, 10, 11 in Jim's day perhaps. But they were doing 30, 40, 50 other races over the course of, Jim raced for basically 10 months with scarcely a weekend off. And sometimes on the Saturday in Britain, on the Sunday in France, or on occasion the Saturday in Canada and flying back across the Atlantic for, the holiday Monday at Crystal Palace in London. You were doing a lot of races, 60, 70, 80 races a season, because some of these were 2, 3, 4 in an afternoon. Similarly, when they were down under in the Tasman series, they would be 4 weeks in a row in New Zealand, a week off, 4 weeks in a row down in Australia.
Yeah.
But, sometimes those particular weekends could have 2 or 3 events involved. And just I love a little aside about his, time in 65 down under. He does the 4 races. He's got that kind of 12-day gap to the Australian leg, and he learns to fly in that 12 days.
In 12 days?
And he gets down in New Zealand and he gets his licence, and we believe he flies solo for the first time 12 days after he starts his lessons.
Yeah.
He was a master of machinery, even not just on a racetrack. So, yeah.
And yet, he was the most modest and quiet of men, wasn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, people who knew him talk about this fact that he just excelled in a race car. He was so decisive and so strong in his decision making and so expert in his sense of the car, his feel for the car. Away from the racetrack, an incredibly quiet, shy, reserved man. Didn't really like the limelight. You know, he wasn't someone who courted publicity. He just liked to get back home to the farm. When you see him being interviewed, he's clearly not very comfortable. No. You know, someone who's in complete command in the race car setting, but in front of the TV cameras or the radio interview, very nervous. And then there's a great story that one of his nephews tells that was passed on to him, I think by Jackie Stewart, that they were once in somewhere in North America driving, and they came to a railroad crossing in a open part of country, and you could see about a mile in each direction, and it was just a long, long straight. And Jim kind of edged up towards the railroad crossing and turned to Jackie and said, "Do you think it will be all right?" Someone who 150, 180 miles an hour on the racetrack would know instinctively just what to do. But in the sort of setting like that, do you think it'll be okay? I can't see a train coming, but, And there's also these great stories about, that Jim would say when they were in London, "Let's go out and see a film," or "Let's go out for a meal." And he'd be driving and they'd go past somewhere and he'd say, "Oh, that looks good. Oh, but I wonder if maybe that other place we went sometime." And they'd drive around so much that by the time they decided, all the films would have started or dinner time would have passed. He just seems to have been a wholly indecisive and very quiet, not really a leader away from the track. But on the track, he was just top of the world. So,
isn't that strange? Because I think it was Patrick Head, from when he was running Williams, who was asked about the drivers that have worked for Williams, and his favourite quote was, "They're all bastards." And that I think when you say that about Jim, they weren't all bastards then, were they? That even the people that he was racing with, I mean, Jim was particularly quiet, but people like Graham Hill and Joe Bonnier and people like that, they were not the egotists that you would probably associate them with.
I think there's probably a few reasons for that, and in particular, of course, there's nothing like the money and the level of, obviously investment and things at stake in those days. And also, let's be, not be about the bush, it was very, very dangerous. And you were racing with a group of people who you knew that if you did something silly, or they did something silly, or just bad luck struck, that you could be badly hurt, killed, or they could. And it no doubt was a sense of, there's a kind of camaraderie built up almost from that knowledge that you were doing something inherently dangerous. And, equally, they were travelling around the world, and of course the teams were very small. There weren't many people travelling with them, and they all seemed to have been, I'm sure they didn't all get on like a house on fire, but a number of them clearly just became great mates.
Yeah.
They'd go on holiday together, they'd go water skiing together, they'd, go on safari, they'd share a flat in London, all kinds of things. Jim would bring Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart and so on up to Berwick for the annual motor club dinner. And they came along, and the photos seemed to show them having a whale of a time.
Yeah.
And it's, because Jim was their pal, and Jim said, "Come to my local race club dinner," and off they would go. So it seems to have been a real, a friendly environment, and an environment where, as you say, there was a rivalry in the context of the race, but not so much, I think, away from the track as perhaps there is nowadays.
Now, thinking about quotes that people have said over the years, that it was Bernie Ecclestone who said to, when he was talking about Lotus and Brabham, and that he said to Jochen Rindt, "If you want to be world champion, go to Lotus. If you want to stay alive, go to Brabham." And do you think that Jim, not in that spectrum particularly, but do you think that Jim was too loyal to Chapman?
There's an interesting point there as to, for a few seasons after he won his second world title in the Indy, obviously they had a worse time of it, 66, 67, some bad luck in there as well. He could have been Indy champion, really should have been in 66, for example. But there is that question. On the other hand, Jim's success came because Colin Chapman gave him a car for which his natural gentleness and amazing sense of feel for the car could exploit to the maximum. Equally, he was driving for a team that obviously had, in comparison to others, a bad safety record, a lot of people in crashes, sadly a number of them killed over the years. And so I can see that question. The other interesting point about it, of course, is that there's always these stories that Jim wasn't even the best paid driver in the team because he never asked for a pay rise.
Is that right?
Apparently the story is that, and that Colin Chapman never actually really realised this because he never sort of properly looked into who was getting paid what. And so maybe Jim was just a little bit too much a kind of go with the flow. I mean, people are like that in all walks of life. I'm probably like that in my life. You just go with the flow. And so I can see that. I mean, whether he would ever have won all the things he did if he hadn't stuck with Lotus, who knows? But equally, it's a fair point. You know, would he still be with us today if he'd not driven for Lotus at the end? We don't know. It's all a what if.
And going back to that dreadful day at Hockenheim, he died in what was really a freak accident, wasn't it? That nobody quite knows what happened.
No.
But going on from your point, I think whether he'd been in a Lotus or a Brabham or anything else, the same accident would have happened.
Yes. I mean, it was just, it's interesting when we have, for example, school groups or, certain kind of, holiday groups and things that come to the museum, people can't really get their head around the idea that he died in a Formula 2 race that didn't count for a championship for him. And how did he crashed into trees. There was trees near the track. Well, the track went through a forest.
Yeah.
And something happened to the car. We never will know what. Puncture, suspension failure, fuel pump trouble. We're not quite sure what it would have been. And he left at high speed straight into the trees because there were none of the safety features that you think of now. It's actually interesting now, when you see the contemporary Formula One of today, the amount of angst that goes on between drivers about, so-and-so shouldn't have done that, they caused that smash up, or they put me out of the race, or they were the cause of that collision, they were completely carried away and shouldn't have done what they did. In Jim's time, doing those things, you could have got yourself or someone else killed. Yeah. And Jackie Stewart talks about the fact that, in a way, the racing's become so safe now that the drivers don't really realise what they're doing still could be dangerous, and certainly would have been in his day.
Yeah.
And the fact is, in Jim's day, as Hockenheim sadly is the example, something could happen that was nobody's fault. Just something happened to a car, and there weren't all the track safety features and the car safety features to let you survive it. And he left at very high speed into the forest, and that was the end of the great all-rounder as we think of him as in the museum. But also the first Formula One champion to die competing. People had died in practice and testing cars and so on. But even that event, as we heard earlier on going on in the museum, it didn't stop the race.
No,
because it was a dangerous sport. I mean, I don't know if the figures are correct, but people say it was similar odds to being a Battle of Britain fighter pilot.
Yeah.
It was in that respect, it was a completely different world, not just a different era. It was like a different kind of event entirely.
I'm interested, you say that you show around kids, school groups, younger people's groups and those sorts of things. How do they take the Jim Clark story? I mean, it's distant history. If you're 12 or 13 years old, it's different. It's distant history, but that they're not used to their heroes dying in the sport and in motorsport. That, for goodness sake, it's a very, very long time since Ayrton Senna died, and that would be probably the biggest hero death that has happened in comparatively recent times.
Yes.
But how do your school groups take it when you're explaining to them that there was this huge star who won everything he touched, and he died in a race accident?
It's interesting, yes. I mean, a number of them understand, if we're talking about local border schools, for example, they'll understand probably a very, very basic level of it because the rally happens every year. They know there's a museum here. So they probably know the name Jim Clark, they associate it with Formula One, and a good number of them will probably know that there's a museum here because he died. They wouldn't necessarily know. They'll know that he's not still around because they haven't seen him at, an award thing, or he hasn't been into the school to talk to them, about what he achieved. They probably won't know the context of that unless, maybe their grad or their granddads told them, or, was a fan themselves or similar, pass the story on. I think it probably is a bit of a confusion for them because they imagine that maybe he died in a road accident. When you explain that he died so long ago when he was still racing, You know, they maybe don't understand the idea that actually, you know, when you're competing, it could be dangerous enough that you might die in the race.
Yeah.
And even if they're followers of Formula One, you know, which obviously a number of youngsters are, of course, as you say now, the idea of anybody even getting hurt is pretty much unknown. You know, the way I describe it to the kids is, you know, an accident nowadays that causes the driver to hop out and go back to the pits feeling very bashful and apologising to all the team for ruining their weekend, in Jim's day could put you in the hospital or worse.
Or worse, yeah.
And so I think for some of them it's also a bit of a shock to understand that there was racing without the safety. I think for others, if they have an awareness of it, there's almost a kind of morbid curiosity as to what happened. And I think the other aspect of it is the idea that you can't explain and tell them exactly what happened is also, you know, we live in a world now where anything can, maybe not always accurately, but someone can proffer an explanation.
Yeah.
Science or philosophy or whatever else could give you the answer. And of course, we just don't know what happened to Jim's car. They tried to find out, I mean, quite unusually at the time. They did a full investigation into the wreckage, took it all apart, looked at it all. They couldn't figure out what had caused it. And so to have a man who's a great champion and dies at the time, not in uncommon circumstances, but to us looking back 60 years on, it feels like shocking and uncommon that the world champion has been, dies. But then to not know why that happened seems an extra level of sort of oddity.
And Jim's fame lives on in photographs which are fabulous, and you've got hundreds of photographs around the museum here which really paint the picture. But for you, as a man who is steeped in the Jim Clark mythology, what do you think of in terms of a car when you think of Jim? Is it the 25?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah.
Is it the Indy car? Is it Cortina? What is it?
I think the Cortinas have a natural attraction because they're the one that, for so many visitors that come here, they say, oh, my dad had a Ford Cortina.
Yeah. Or
I used to see Jim racing those at, you know, one of the saloon car events. They're probably the ones that, and obviously it's a certain generation now, people to be back when Jim was racing, but they're the ones that are probably most relatable, or people give you anecdotes about, I once saw Jim in an X. I think if you're talking about his great achievements, of course, you know, the Lotus 25, the Lotus 33. At the end of his career, actually, the Lotus 49, you know, that he never had the chance to fully exploit, perhaps, you know, are kind of these iconic images. I actually, personally, being a Berwickshire man, draw back to some of his early cars. You know, to think what he as an amateur with a group of friends, you know, bank clerks, mechanics, farm workers, etc., you know, what they were achieving. So the Porsche 1600, the Jaguar D-Type, the Aston Martin DBR1, as you say, going to Le Mans and so on. And also the little novelty machines, you know, the things that he only ever races once or twice. And not all of them even very seriously, you know. Seeing the footage a few weeks ago from Goodwood, the great lineup they had there, I hadn't actually realised that the Gogglemobile that, you know, Ian Scott Watson, his friend, owned in this 56-7 kind of era, I hadn't realised that was actually still on the go. You know, we photographs of Jim in a driving test in that little bubble car.
Yeah.
You know, or some of the novelty things. One of his tractors still survives, you know, and has been restored.
Wow.
So he never raced it, but it was an important part of his life, because to him, racing and farming were two aspects of his personality. It wasn't that he was a farmer who gave it up to go racing.
No.
He did both at the same time. And so there's a lot of little things like that still survive. Some of his road cars, we were talking earlier on about, you know, we've had in the museum before, the last road car he had, this left-hand drive Elan, the little yellow one from Paris. And so you think about all these little contributions they all make to his story. And of course, a Formula One driver nowadays, you know, might be associated with a variety of teams, and they might win the World Championship and be associated with that one car. Well, for Jim, there only is really the one team as a professional, it's Team Lotus. But there are so many cars, because he's doing all these types of racing. And when you add in all the stuff from his earlier days, and some novelty machines that he used, you know, he didn't exclusively drive for Lotus as a professional, but almost always. But, you know, there's a lovely poster on the side of the lift shaft, actually, in the museum, which is by no means absolutely conclusive of all the cars he ever raced. And there must be about 30 on it, you know, on this all side-on shots. And it just shows that he was that great all-round driver. So sometimes, as I say, even in the same afternoon.
Finally, just a question for me, or an answer for me, that these days people talk about Jim, and that this is the Jim Clark Museum. More and more people talk about Jimmy Clark.
Yes.
And that I was lucky enough to see him race many times, and he was never Jimmy Clark. He was always Jim. Thoughts?
Yeah, we've noticed that phenomenon ourselves. He was Jimmy in America. He was very much Jimmy Clark, the other side of the pond, and he was Jim over here. So whether it's a sort of with, everything being online now, and you'll know this yourself, everything from podcasts to YouTubes to, subscription TV and everything else sort of being all homogenised and you can watch anywhere in the world. Whether there's a bit of cross-pollination in that way, I don't know. Or whether it's people that, Jimmy sort of seems a bit chummy, so it's a kind of way of doing that. But no, you're quite right that in his own day in Britain, it was very much Jim Clark. Yeah. And in America, it was very much Jimmy Clark. And there does seem to have been a bit of a kind of mishmashing of the two together now.
Well, I can wholeheartedly recommend the Jim Clark Museum. That it's a fantastic way to spend several hours, and if you're anoraks like most of our listeners are, it's probably a lot of hours wandering around here and having a good look. You have a small display of cars here, but it's mostly memorabilia, and that it's mostly the history, and there's videos and all sorts of fantastic stuff. I can't tell all of our listeners how good it is, and that people really ought to come and see it, because it's something very, very special. But for now, Kenny McLean, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Now, you may recall that on our October edition of the Historic Racing News Podcast, we announced that we'd be working with Race Retro, which is, let's face it, the UK's leading exhibition for UK motorsport. Jim and I are joined today by Gabes Ewbank from Race Retro, who's here to tell us some of the things that we can expect to see at the show. Gabes, I know that we're still nearly 4 months away from the show, but for anyone who hasn't visited before, just give us a bit of an overview, because it's so much more than just a few static displays, isn't it?
It certainly is, Paul, and thank you guys for having me on. So, it's more than static displays. It's more than a show as well, to be honest, because it's a pre-season get-together for all motorsport enthusiasts. It's the only sort of major UK event now, for this year at least, where people can sort of come together, whether they are old racing buddies or rivals, and everyone in the community is there, and you can prepare for the race season ahead while enjoying some fantastic cars, and on Saturday and Sunday even get out to the live rally stage. And that's something I wanted to chat about briefly here. You talked about static displays, and we have great cars indoors, but we also have outdoor action. So on Saturday and Sunday, we have the live rally stage, which is powered by Rallying with Group B, and my goodness, you just get some of the most iconic rally cars on the track once again, whether it be Quattros, Lancias, 6R4s, Escorts. We had the ex-Colin McRae Escort, which was phenomenal to see back on the track again, Imprezas, and it's just, it's a motorsport enthusiast dream, especially if you're keen for rallying, and you don't have to go to the middle of Wales to see it either. We're right in the middle of England, so it's fantastic. And you can do passenger rides in that. So I remember my first year, I actually had a ride in an Audi Quattro, and it's someone coming in, 21 years old, haven't really seen them in the flesh before, to suddenly be behind, not the wheel, thank goodness, but behind the bonnet and just feel the power. It was insane. So that is really good fun. If you come down, you've got to get a passenger ride. What an experience. We also got the historic kart track outdoors, which is great. 60s to 90s karts, where so many racers began, and that's really cool to see. They are different to what you get nowadays. I mean, Paul, we were talking recently about your grandson. I'm sure he races slightly different machines to what they were in the 60s, but you know, in a few years we'll have to get him up and on the track.
Yeah. Who knows? It may well happen. And inside the halls, Gabes, there's so much more, isn't it? There's cars and parts, and you can go and talk to race organisers, and you can get your memorabilia and your paintings and your books. I'm always amazed at just how broad the range is.
I mean, we like to structure the show in quite an easy format for people coming in, whether you're a motorsport enthusiast or in the industry as a professional. So we've got the Race Ready Hall, which is kind of the first real hall you go into when you enter, and it does what it says in the tin. The aim of the hall is, if you do a circuit and kind of chat to everyone there, you should be pretty much prepared to get racing in a few months. So we've got the racing organisers, suppliers, specialists, Motorsport UK, where you can literally renew your licence there and then. It's a lot quicker than doing it online. That's one of the perks. And then from the brand's point of view, you can get your oils done, wheels, tuning, race wear. We actually had HRX just sign up recently, which is they're coming over from Italy, which is fantastic. So it shows we have the big brands, and then we have the real specialists who you can make sure you have the right prop shaft or tyre gauge and stuff like that. So it's a real mix in the Race Ready Hall, but it's a place to meet preparers, organisers, experts, and really plan ahead. And then you kind of walk through onwards and you reach our Hall of Fame, which is a motorsport enthusiast dream. There's over 100 old competition cars there, covering kind of every discipline. So you've got F1, Le Mans, rally, hill climb, touring, and last year we even had a NASCAR. For the first time in my memory, I'm sure we've had one before, but it was a Pontiac Grand Prix, and oh my gosh, the sound of it coming into the halls on the Thursday. I mean, Jim, you got some different kind of sounds going on on the other side of the pond.
We sure do.
It was mind-blowing. I've never heard anything like it. So loud. It was like a growl and a scowl at the same time. Very cool. In that hall, we've also got the cars, but we've got the Talk Motorsport live stage where you guys will be obviously over the course of the weekend, which is fantastic. And you'll be joined by motorsport legends, which is always great to sort of hear the stories, because I mean it's one of the only sports I can think of where there's just endless amounts of crazy stories, and every single person in the industry seems to have them. So it regardless of who you're listening to, it's always good fun.
So it sounds to me, for someone who's never been there before, that this is not only an opportunity for the racer to prepare and to do business, but it is also a rare opportunity for the fans to mingle with the racers in a way that they normally wouldn't be able to on a race weekend.
Yeah, totally. So that is how the show is really split off. We do have a massive part, and it's our core market are the racing professionals, and our slogan, which we've launched, which we'll come on to, is all about serving those people. But a massive part of it is the enthusiasts that come and just have such a love for the sport, and you can sit in the sort of stands and listen to Jason Plato and Matt Neal hash it out, and bits and bobs like that, and go and get an autograph from them and your photo done, and really meet some of the greatest racers of all time. We've had some fantastic names over the years, and we're going to have some fantastic more this year.
I am the rally guy of this group, so I'm especially excited to come and see some of the live stage action and see some of those great cars. That's actually the era when I competed, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But how much, and that's very historic, which I am. How much has historic racing grown as part of what is this massive event. I mean, when you talk about the club motorsport scene, it's everything from, as you said, the historic karts to the circuit racing of today.
Yeah.
Where's the historic racing genre fit into that?
I mean, Race Retro is all about historic racing. I think it's such a significant part of the motorsport industry because it's just so amazing to watch. I think from a spectator's point of view, it's fantastic to see some of the most desirable cars of all time out on the track again. I think the racing style is very different to what we get now. You know, cars on period tyres move around a lot more. It's spectacular to watch in that sense. It's great to drive. There's a lot more overtaking, and I feel like each car has its own strengths and weaknesses. Whereas, you know, you look at the F1 now, every single car is so marginal that it's neck and neck the entire time in terms of performance. Whereas you go back then, and on any given day, given sort of the weather and whatnot, you got a completely different race. And I mean, I always think is the drivers back then must have been so skilled to drive at that pace and at that competitive level. I mean, I pose a question to you guys: if drivers like Jim, Clark, and Hill race now, I mean, how do you think they'd do in the current F1, for example? Do you think they'd be, once they got used to the new technology and stuff, the actual driving skill, they've got to be up there with the best of the best now?
I think they would be. I think the interesting part of that is, could they get through the ladder system? Because they started out by what would be today's standards pretty ancient, and in reality they are they were young men, but by today's standards they were old guys when they started.
Yeah.
And I think some of the greats probably couldn't have been bothered with all the BS that a guy has to go through now to get into the sport.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, if you look at Juan Fangio, 5 times world champion, didn't win his first championship until he was over 40, which would be unthinkable now. And so I think there are 2 bits, and Jim and Paul and I often talk about this. There are 2 different parts to this. There's historic motorsport, as in historic motorsport in 2025, and there's the history of our sport, which is looking back at Jim Clark. Jim and I were in the Jim Clark Museum just 3 weeks ago, and that the stuff there is amazing. But they're different people. And I think it's a bit like saying, how do you compare Usain Bolt's with Bobby Charlton? Different sports, different.
Great analogy.
All those things, and so I tend not to. But Gate, you mentioned that you have a new strapline. Tell us what it is.
Sure. So, I mean, touching on it, it's Serving Club Motorsport is what we've kind of released, and it all links together with what I've said so far. But and what Jim touched on as well. Club Motorsport, it's the beating heart of motorsport. They do it for passion, not money, and long may it continue. So that is what we're there for. I mean, ultimately, we strive to grow the sport, get younger generations involved, more women involved, and make sure every stakeholder has a place to connect and build. So, for clubs, we give them a sort of a home and a stage to grow their spectators for the seasons and attract new members. For suppliers, we gather lots of people together to, sell stuff to grassroots racing and really grow the suppliers, because grassroots racing consists of a lot of their sales just because of the pure magnitude of people doing it. And actually, it can be quite easy to get involved in the sport, and that's what we're really trying to inspire people to do through the likes of working with Motorsport UK is to really get more people involved and bring everything together. So for races, it's a great place to get some tips and tricks from, you know, actual motorsport legends who have done it, or the Motorsport UK technical team who are there to answer your questions and, you know, try and give you that edge to start getting podium places. And then for the fans, it's all the racing organisers are there, and it's just an absolute buzz for the season ahead. You can pick out the racing calendars of what you want to go to, and yeah, you know, a lot of it is around historic motorsport, but what a fun thing to go and watch with your weekend. So yeah, we kind of just bring everything together, serving that club motorsport, making sure that the grassroots is looked after, because that's where it all starts. And without grassroots, the rest would slowly dwindle because you wouldn't be getting any new people in.
That's a valid point. One of the other things they let me take care of here is the auction scene. And this has been an unbelievable year for race car sales, driven at the beginning of the year by sales from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. But iconic auctioneers are a big part of what fans can take a look at. And as you said, if you're getting ready to prep for the season, especially historically, Iconic might just have a car for you that you could then take out onto the track.
They certainly do. I mean, Iconic they take up the entire Hall 1, and we work with them for a long time, and they always bring together a fantastic array of different cars. They do the collector's car sales, so you can buy a stunning classic car, but we do competition car sales as well. So yeah, you can go around the race ready hall and then into Hall 1 and actually get yourself a new set of wheels or a new toy to try out over the new season. We've had last year we had some great cars on offer. We had an Audi S1 E2 Pikes Peak Special, and that went for 123 grand. We had an MG Metro 6R4, 270 grand that went for. A Chevron B8, which was really cool, that went for 146 grand. So we get like some of the really top level competition cars, but then we also had an Escort Mark 1 which went for 24 grand, and I think, you know, the infamous
that's more
Escort,
in my price range. Yeah, that's much more in my price range.
Yeah, absolutely. The infamous Escort, I mean, just being able to drive that around for a great price is fantastic, and you can get even below 10 grand. There was a Jag XJ SC competition car that went for just under 8 grand. So we have a real mix. So there's a lot to do, and also if you're just a spectator, there's something about a live auction which is just an extravaganza, right? It's live, it's there, and it's really cool to see.
When I have been to the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the past, Gabes, I always had to bring an extra suitcase to take the wine home. Paul has informed me that I may need to bring an extra suitcase to take all the books and tchotchkes and things like that might fall into my pockets and cause my darling Betty back home to look at the credit card bill and go, "What?"
Yeah. I mean, I get you. I mean, this is the part of the show where you really see the true enthusiasts, because you do a walk around the show and then 3 hours later they're still in the Auto Jumble Classic Trader Village Hall with a couple of bags, because I mean it's just amazing. It's a treasure trove full of stuff. We have the sort of classic car parts and tools and all these rare stuff that you haven't seen in years and won't even be on Facebook Marketplace. But it's just a fantastic place to try and find different things that you might need from a restoration point of view, or to spruce up your car. But then all the automobilia, it's like stepping into a celebration of classic motorsport. There's everything on offer, from scarce literature which hasn't been seen in years, to books, photos and artwork. It's really, really cool. Really, really cool.
Now, Gabes, finally, and before I let you go, we heard in the last few days that Autosport International have announced that their 2026 show at the National Exhibition Centre is not going to take place and is now cancelled. So I'm not going to put you on the spot. But, well, I might, but not this one, not this time. But it does mean that Race Retro has become the place for that pre-season meeting. That are you going to Race Retro? Because I'll see you there on Saturday, and we'll have a coffee and a chat or whatever. It really is going to put Race Retro at the very heart of that pre-season chat, isn't it?
It is, and everything I've touched on today, I think signifies that we are that place, and we definitely can be the number one without Autosport. Obviously, there was industry rumours since sort of early summer about potentially not happening. Yesterday, there was a press release on the website and social media, and my message to the industry would be to come to Race Retro and prepare for your season here. Buy your gear you need, and we can certainly cater to you, and we can offer you also the likes of some incredible old competition cars and live rallying outside, and just one big celebration of historic motorsport. I mean, that's what it really comes down to, is celebrating the history of motorsport, which you two on this podcast celebrate all the time. So you'll be well suited there.
Good. So tell us how we can get tickets, and you did mention to me that you would be providing a discount code for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So the show is 20th to the 22nd of February, Stoneleigh Park, which is in Coventry, about half an hour from the station. And yeah, come and catch historic racing news on the Talk Motorsport stage all 3 days, along with some other motorsport legends that will be revealed soon. You can head to our website and use the discount code MDHN and get yourself a couple of quid off per ticket. It's the place to be before the motorsport season begins, and look at some bloody cool cars while you're at it. So yeah, come on down. We'd love to have you, and come and see historic racing news on the live stage as well.
Gabes, thank you so much for that, and thank you for coming on the show to introduce Race Retro to some of our listeners who maybe haven't been before. We'll, as you know, be bringing regular updates, and we'll be talking about some of the new things as you announce them to us, and it'll also be, of course, on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, which is called HRN Chronicles. But Gabes, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Paul, Jim, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll speak soon.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast, a copyrighted presentation of historic racing news in association with White Squirrel Studios. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or usage without the expressed written permission of Historic Racing News is strictly prohibited.
Now, you'll hear many people talk about the Le Mans 24-hour race as a British motor race organised by the French. And up to a point, that is fairly true. But it's equally true that American sports car fans love the race every bit as much as we Brits. And that's why the late Tim Considine started his magnum opus called Twice Around the Clock, the Yanks at Le Mans, which covered both cars and drivers and teams from 1923 to 1979. Sadly, Tim died in 2022, but the first 3 volumes of his book have been brought up to date by a team of people who've been kind enough to join me and Jim on Historic Racing News. Now, Jim, this really is an amazing achievement, which I don't think any of us could have seen coming.
No, and when Tim passed, I thought it was a lost opportunity, but a great group of people got together and brought the next 2 volumes together, and 3 of that group have joined us: Jodi, Ellis, Neil Smith, and John Nickas. Just 3 of probably 8 or 9 folks that all pulled together to bring this project to its next point. Tim's work ended in '79. They have put together a 2-volume set, which is 1980 to 89, and then 1990 to 99. So I'm going to start with you, Jodi. You were you worked with Tim on the first book, and you were instrumental in seeing this to fruition. It must have been not only quite a loss when we all lost Tim, but how did you then pull it all together?
Oh boy. Well, Tim and I had started editing the next 2 volumes before he passed, and he had been working on the Joni Mitchell cover and a display for a New York show for a museum. And so we kind of put it on pause for a minute, and then we were just picking it back up when he passed away. And so I did have all the content from him and such. So when he passed away, I talked to Willie, his wife, and she gave her blessing to go ahead and finish. And that's when I immediately called John, and he helped gather the group, and the rest is history.
Now, Tim is, besides the author of this book, we were discussing before we started our recording, and John Nickas joins us. John, Tim was much more than just an author, wasn't he? He was pretty renowned in Hollywood, too.
Yeah, and I think if you're an American, you probably know Tim Considine, unless you're a car person, from things like the Mickey Mouse Club or My Three Sons, or his role in the movie Patton. He came from an entertainment family. He, as I said, was a polymath. He did all sorts of things. As Jodi's referring to the album cover Blue for Joni Mitchell that Tim shot the cover photo for. He really knew a lot of different things, but I really believe that cars were his passion. And I think it's borne out by all the work that he did later in life.
Yeah, when I met him in 2019, that was certainly very clear to me that his passion was the automobile and also Le Mans. This book, for me personally, as an American, is hugely important. I got to do the 24 Hours of Le Mans 25 times. It's an event that has been part of my life for almost all my life. And so to have something that documents what all of my heroes growing up did is very important. Neil, as a person who was born and raised in the UK, but now domiciles out on the West Coast, what was it like contributing to a book about all these American heroes?
Well, above all else, it was kind of an honor. I owe so much to John. Like, he basically took me under his wing and helped me get my Tom Walkinshaw book On the Prowl out last year. And so when he reached out to me and said, "Hey, look, I've got this project that I'm working on. Would love if you could help out." I was like, "John, I'll do anything for you, whatever you want." And then it turned out it was this project about the American participation at Le Mans. So, as you say, I'm now a U.S. citizen, and I love the United States. I love living here, and I obviously feel a great connection to the country. Also being a huge fan of Le Mans and having been there a number of times myself, and previously written the book about the Walkinshaw sports cars. It was very natural for me to be able to just get stuck in and do some work on this book. And initially I was asked to do the 1999 chapter, which was a lot of fun because that was a great year at Le Mans. And then there were a few other things that we brought in as well. With the Jag book, I had written a lot about kind of the political stuff underpinning Group C and actually even before Group C. And so it was important that we captured some of that as well. I know that Tim was very switched on and knew an awful lot about what was going on in the background. And so there's a section in here that I collaborated with one of the other authors involved, Roger Attaway, on explaining what was going on with the FIA and the ACO and why Group C died at the end of 1993 and all of that. So there was a lot to it that went kind of beyond just the American nature of it. But but it was definitely a lot of fun writing the 1999 chapter and really focusing on things like the Chrysler Vipers that were there, as opposed to, the BMW that won that year. That was a great story, but the Chrysler Vipers that dominated the GT class, that was a very American story, and that was a lot of fun to focus on.
The forward for the original set was done by Dan Gurney. You had two forwards here, one done by Hurley Haywood, who's probably behind Dan, or maybe even more so than Dan, with his multiple endurance victories, both at Le Mans and the Daytona 24 Hours, and also Reeves Callaway. Reeves Callaway and the Callaway Corvette in 1995 were a huge statement about the Corvette project, which once the century turned, and I'm hoping that we'll see these cars in the next two volumes, hope. The Callaway project plays quite prominently at the beginning of that second volume. Was that as important, you think, John, as many of us felt at the time?
I definitely think it was, and obviously Reeves's whole contribution was very bittersweet, looking back at it, because he completed that forward literally a day before he passed away in a very tragic accident, and we had spent probably the previous 2 weeks working on the history of the Callaway cars and getting his thoughts on it. And Reeves, you talk about Tim being a polymath. Reeves was an exceptional human being and one of the smartest men I've ever met. And he had resolved that if Callaway was going to go to Le Mans, it was going to do it at a very high level. And, that commitment to really put forth a solid effort and to give it their all really, I think, shines through when you read the chapters on those years that Callaway participated. And it was such an honor to have him involved in this project.
Jodi, these volumes, both the first three and then these next two, are stunningly beautiful. How did you come about the layout? What was the thought process behind it, and how important was it for you to carry that through in the second set of volumes?
Well, thank you for your kind words. So when I first started it, gosh, seems like forever ago. I came up with a basic layout and I sent Tim a sample chapter and he loved it. And he said it brought him to tears because all of the work that went into it, all of the writing, you see that in Word and you have the pictures, but to see them all together and come together as a book, it was really special to him. So we kept that layout, and it just it flowed with this one too. Sometimes layouts don't, depending on the year and how it goes, but with this particular book, each year it just seemed like it fit throughout the decade. So we kept it, and we are going to do the final two volumes. It may turn into three just because of appendices and such, but that's the goal. In fact, after this meeting, we're having a meeting for the next one, so we're very excited about that, and the layout will continue on.
The first set was red.
Yep.
This set is white.
Yep.
Is the next one going to be blue?
Secret's out now.
And Jim, can I say something?
Please.
I think that we all do a great disservice to Jodi by calling her the book's designer, because she was so much more than that. I don't know how many books I've done with Jodi, but it's probably, I don't know, a half dozen at this point. In every single author's note, I say that in a better world, in a perfect world, her name should actually be on the cover as a co-author. And in this project, she literally brought it home. I can't remember how much Tim had done, but it wasn't a great deal. She was instrumental at every point in organizing it and making sure that everything was there, and selecting photographs. And she is the world's best designer. And I say that, with a fair degree of confidence, in the International Historic Motoring Awards, which are next month, of the 5 nominees, Jodi designed 2 of them. She also designed Neil's book, which is up for a Royal Automobile Club Award for Book of the Year. She has got more books of the year that she's designed than any other designer alive and probably has ever been alive. And, to have her involvement in anything is really the imprimatur of excellence. And she really is the best.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Nobody's going to argue with that, John. That's the same. I've got a question for you, and for each of you, which is, this book is called The Yanks at Le Mans. Which do you think was the most American of the cars ever that have been at Le Mans? Maybe in the 2 decades that we're talking about here, but maybe in the previous ones as well. Which was the most American of all the cars?
Well, I'm biased, and I'll go first because I'm going to go outside of this time span. But I don't know if you know this, Paul. Jim, you might, because I don't know what you've read of mine. My first job was working for a guy named Briggs Cunningham as a 9-year-old. And his museum was out here in Orange County, and I got to clean wheels and sweep floors, and eventually I got to do some work in the library. And I got to listen in on a lot of stories. And I didn't get to be involved in a lot of the conversations because I was such a small child, but I got to listen to Briggs talking with other people about his role in Le Mans. And, I think other than Briggs, Luigi Canetti deserves some just praise for getting Briggs involved. But Briggs was an all-American effort, and his dream was to win Le Mans with an American team and an American car with American drivers. And the fact that he came so close so many times, he really set the tone for what we did as a nation. And despite the fact that we came into this party relatively late, we still stand 5th in the overall rankings for countries at Le Mans. And during the periods we're talking about, from 1980 to 1999, we were the grid fillers. We had the money, we had the teams. We kept Le Mans alive in a lot of respects when they were having trouble getting cars to compete. It was Americans that came over and kept the race viable.
Thank you. And Neil, I know that you're a world expert on Group C, and that there was plenty of interest then. But where would your favourite American car or team be?
Well, I'm not sure it'd be my favorite. I am going to step outside Group C for this one, and actually, it does overlap with the chapter that I wrote for this book, 1999, and that would be the participation of Panos. I felt like Panos really did represent the best of American sports car racing, just for so many reasons. First of all, you think of like the Panos LMP1 Roadster that participated that year, and others as well. Front engine, just this massive V8. Like, who goes to Le Mans with a front engine prototype? Like, Nissan showed that they couldn't do it a few years ago, but Panos did it, and they're like, "Yep, I think we'll be fine. We got a nice big engine. Let's just do it." But also the passion of Dan Panos behind all that, like. Throughout the history of Le Mans, you see these like really passionate American participants, and John highlighted Briggs Cunningham, but then you think of like the classic GT40 participations. There was passion there. The folks at Ford, like they had real passion about it. It always seems to be driven by really passionate people when it comes to American participation at Le Mans, and Dr. Don, I think, stands up there with the best of them. So, definitely that team. And if I had to highlight a car, probably that LMP1, with the front engine. Like, what a cool car.
The one that's painted in the Stars and Stripes would be the one.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was taking it to a whole new level. But, lots. There were plenty of good liveries that Panos put on their cars, but that one definitely stands out.
We used to joke during the American Le Mans series that every time they fired that car up, they had to notify the local seismograph folks because they They didn't want false reports of earthquakes. So.
No.
Jodi, what would be your favorite American car?
Oh, and I hate to do this, but to me it was the Fords in the 60s, and then when they beat Ferrari, that to me was just a fun story. And like Neil said, the passion. They just, it was incredible, the whole story about how they got there, how they won, how they beat Ferrari. It was pretty neat.
And
Yeah.
you couldn't have had two more American drivers in A.J. Foyt and Dan Gurney.
That's so true.
My two personal favorites. That to me will always be the seminal moment. But I agree with John and with Neil. They pointed out two outstanding. You've picked the three. Between the three of you, I think you've picked the
Yes.
three most
Top
perfect
three.
ones. So yeah, Jodi, did you think that you would get such a positive response when you started to ask people like John and Neil and to be involved and to carry on this project?
I did, because if you know John and you know Neil, you know that they say yes, and they'll do anything in their power to get things done. And this was a passion project for me, and I was so close with Tim. There was a lot of tears going into designing the book, finishing the book, pulling it all together. Would Tim like it? All of the things. And so when I approached John and he approached the other guys, they immediately said yes. Everyone said yes. My friend Roger Attaway, who Neil talked about, he was on board, and it was just incredible, the support that I got for this project, and it meant a lot. It really did.
This is for all three of you. We'll do another round table. What's your favorite part of these two volumes? These two new volumes. Do you have a favorite part?
I do.
Oh.
My favorite part is in the appendix, one of the appendices, where we did the charts, and they're all colorful and kind of chaotic, but you can see the American participation and the color, and then they start out, and I guess I just like that visual where you can see, okay, well, this guy started down here at, this level, and then he got all the way up to the top, and I just thought that, or she, let's not be biased here, but there was some great women drivers and teams, so it was just really fun to see those tables. It's like you can read about it, but then to see the visual was really cool for me.
Neil?
I actually like the section right at the very end where all of us who participated got a chance to provide a little bit of kind of personal insight and to hear about how authors like Randy Leffingwell and Sean Cridland, how they felt about the project was really awesome to feel like, for me as a relatively new author, this is just the second book that I've worked on. To be part of that group of people was totally humbling, and I just love to read how they were thinking about the project as a whole. So yeah, and it's very touching because there's some connection with Tim for some of the people who are writing at the end there. Others, there isn't a connection. There's just like, we just know this is a passion project that a whole bunch of people have come together to get done, and it's really touching to read through all those little bits at the end from each of the participants.
Well, you on the prowl, and now this, you set your bar pretty high there, young man.
Jim, that's why I hate Neil so much, that he's 2 for 2 now. So.
Well, the next time round, it's John and me, so we're in it together for the next project.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to that. Neil's alluding to Group 44, which of course is covered in these 2 volumes, and that's a passion project for me and for Bob Tullius. But for me, given my undistinguished racing career, I think I really like the fact that we were able to shine a spotlight on all the small privateers. People like Peter Kitchak, who went again and again and again, never managed to finish until his last race, or people like, Margie Smith-Haas, who was the first American woman to race at Le Mans, who's really never been talked about. And, it's all those people at the back of the grid that I think I'm most fond of because I can relate best to them. And, in most histories, they don't get talked about a lot. We very rarely ask them for interviews. We very rarely ask them for their comments. And in this book, you really get a sense of the entire scope of American participation, not just from the winners like Hurley or Davy Jones, but also from the people that, were able to get out there for a couple laps when the car blew up to find out what they thought. And so, I think for us to be able to create something that'll sit on people's shelves and be referred to again and again over the coming decades is very special for all of us. And for Neil and Randy and Sean and Roger and Dave and Jodi, it is something that we'll look back at and be able to go, we did a good job on this.
Yeah. Jodi, when can we start looking for the third set in blue, perhaps?
We're hoping end of next year.
Awesome.
But it could be the beginning of 2027.
Sure. Yeah, this is not the work of a moment.
It's really not. It takes a long time, and you want it to be perfect. And so I feel like if you rush it, then you don't get all the little details. And this one, the end is pretty special, to take it to those 100 years and then have the appendices that will show, all the little things, the 50 greatest moments and the top drivers and the stats and all of these fun tables that we're pulling together. I think just needs a little more time. All the interviews, because most of the drivers and teams now are still alive, and so the interviews are going to be insane. It's going to be really fun.
And I'm still hoping, even though he said no, to get Neil's participation in this third set. I know he's busy, but I think Neil makes everything better. He's like those old ASF commercials. So
if we get Group 44 off the plate, then there's maybe a little bit of room to jump in on another project.
Great.
I've got that all recorded, Jodi. I have
Excellent.
Got that conversation recorded. Thank you, all of you, for taking the time. This was really special for me. I remember just my little bit of time meeting Tim, and I bought the first set and carried it home and voraciously went through it. And I recently received the second set, which, dear listeners, is a limited edition. David Bull Publishing, is that correct, Jodi? Is where
Yes.
we can, where people can get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to make a great Christmas gift for that sports car fan in your family. It is a limited edition. They're going to sell out fast. That's why I got mine as quick as I could. And thank you, Neil Smith, John Nickas, and Jodi Ellis. It's been outstanding.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, chaps.
thank you, guys.
And for all of our UK listeners, to save on both shipping costs and the risk of getting the HM Customs and Excise billing you for importing an important book, you can get the book from Horton's Books, hortonsbooks.co.uk, for the combined 2-volume price of £225. So if you are in the UK, that's probably the best way to do it.
And of course, Paul, when the next 2 volumes come out, we'll get together with those folks again, and we'll let you know how to get volumes 6 and 7.
It's turning out to be a huge tome, isn't it? And that's great. It's a great one.
How American!
Now, PJ,
How American!
PJ, you've
It's a
been
huge tome. It couldn't be more American.
There are lots of ways to keep up with historic racing news. Our podcast comes out on the first Wednesday of every month. The 2-hour show includes interviews with drivers and other personalities from years gone by, plus news of historic events like the Goodwood Revival and the Silverstone Festival. And Jim Roller keeps us up to speed on happenings stateside and looks at the activities both on and off the track in the USA.
And you can also follow us on our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles. It's our version of a time machine. We have archive features, exclusive interviews, and behind-the-scenes stories going way back into the history of our glorious sport. Plus, we keep an eye on the latest classic and competition car auction news. It's a place where motorsport's history lives.
And don't forget our amazing Facebook page. With over 1 million views a month, it is one of the leading social media channels for the historic racing fan. We feature tales from years gone by, news from around the racing world, and we also take the opportunity to flesh out the stories we cover on our podcasts with photographs and yet more background information.
If you would like to find more editions of the Historic Racing News podcast, try searching Historic Racing News wherever you get your podcasts.
The YouTube channel is simply called HRN Chronicles.
And just search Facebook for the Historic Racing News page.
Now back to the Historic Racing News podcast and Paul Tarsey.
Now, many of our listeners will recognise the voice of our next guest because he's the voice of Formula One in many different countries around the world. Joining me and Jim Roller today on Historic Racing News is Alex Jacques. Alex, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's good to hear from you and to hear your perspective on your new book, which is celebrating 75 years of Formula One, and that I congratulate you that you've actually done it on the basis of the full 75 years rather than anything else. You didn't start 25 years ago, which for a young man such as yourself would have been a great temptation. You've gone all the way back. Did you enjoy your research?
I absolutely loved it. At various stages, I was thinking this would have been an easier book to write when if I'd done it for the 50th or 60th anniversary of Formula One, the championship beginning. But no, going back and seeing, because we cover the 75 short chapters and 75 moments that, in my view, or the best research I could do, changed the game or had a huge consequence. We tried to tell the Formula One championship history that way, try to do it a slightly different way, try to do it accessibly. So there is detail, but it's not, it's not an encyclopedia. But the research, as you say, it would have been very easy to do the last 25 years, the last 30 years, the stuff that I knew off the top of my head, and just fill in the gaps. But I wanted to cover all of it, and I wanted to cover all of it and go back to the very start, and had a lot of fun. Learned some stories I didn't know along the way, and the research was a joy, because I certainly find the literature of that time, certainly the driver biographies and the driver autobiographies, are frank and direct in a way that you wouldn't get in modern publishing. There's a blunt honesty to a lot of it, and I loved going back through those pages.
Alex, how did the book come about? Where was the genesis? Obviously, there's so much surrounding the 75th anniversary of Formula One. Where did the seed get planted and that grew into this book?
Essentially, there was a couple of ideas. So it sprung out of just research that I had done myself as a commentator, because I think if you hold the microphone for Formula One and you do it for Channel 4 and F1 TV, you should constantly be trying to expand your knowledge of every year of the championship. So that was an aspiration from my point of view as a commentator. Twin that with the idea that we've got so many new fans who don't just give you a quizzical look if you say Sterling Moss, they give you a quizzical look if you say Sebastian Vettel. So the way I thought the best way to do it would be to lump it all together. And I was like, well, hold on. I've written so many intros and scripted pieces and told so many stories in my 10 years covering motor racing behind the microphone that let's knit it together into one book. And that developed into the 75 moments idea, which eventually turned into 320 pages.
And 320 great pages as well.
And how did you narrow down to 75? I mean, obviously the goal of 75 makes so much sense, but then how did you narrow that down from, I'm sure, what were probably in your brain 500?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much that process in that the initial list I came up with was way too weighted towards the modern times, as you touched on. So then I came up with everything I could possibly think of. And as you say, it was about 120 to 200. So then it was whittling it away. And so there are things that I would have loved to have covered, but I feel like so much has been written about certain things that I was like, I don't have anything new to add on that subject. And I wanted it to be as evenly weighted as possible from the start of the championship to present day. So, so that's it was fun going, I don't want to lose that, but I have to. And then some other things maybe I wanted to cover, but the exact truth was hard to find. And certain sources were saying one thing and certain sources were saying the other. So I tried to come up with, eventually the 75 were either things that were incredibly consequential, things that I hadn't heard before, or things where I felt I could highlight it from a different perspective. And that's eventually how we came across the final list of 75.
And I think that in this book, which is called Grid to Glory, you haven't necessarily gone for what somebody who maybe didn't understand Formula One particularly well, they would have gone for those headline stories which are well written and well documented. You've got some real gems in here, which as an anorak, I know perhaps more than many, but many of your readers will see the new stuff. You know, like the fact that Damon Hill was fired from Williams when he was world champion. You know, that sort of stuff.
It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? And fired by Autosport headline, no less. One of the great scoops in Formula One journalism. And there's an interesting story behind the scoop. It's very interesting when you've been in the paddock for a while and you know the full scope of everything that went down, and then you have to try and put it into essentially what is 4 or 5 pages. But yeah, the equivalent of and sometimes some chapters I draw a parallel to present day. I didn't in this one, but the equivalent of Lando Norris leading the world championship and then getting the sack from McLaren feels absolutely impossible now. And yet that's exactly what happened to Damon Hill, and the extraordinary month. And I think his story in general is just remarkable, and the stuff of sporting fairy tale, really. To be placed in the situation that he was in, surrounded by the circus, for him to find out via news bulletin that his father had had a crash, for the family to lose everything, and then to come back with an unfancied junior career and take that opportunity, I think is one of the great sporting stories of all time. So then to add into the fact that when he's on his way to completing this, you know, almost Hollywood movie ending, and he gets fired publicly, and they're not straight with him for a month. I mean, it could only be Williams, and it could only be 90s Williams. It's so compelling. And there were so many stories like that.
And as I say, I congratulate you for those kind of stories, and also that they're very tight. I mean, you're talking about 2, 3, 4 pages maximum for most of the stories that you put in there. The most of your 75 chapters, and that makes it very easy reading, which I think is very wise as well. But when you were doing your research, that where you were looking at people like Damon and people such as that, did you come across any drivers that you thought, I would love to have met so-and-so?
I mean, virtually all that I write about. I mean, I had the good fortune of you know, shaking hands with, when I first started covering motor racing, I was able to get into paddocks fairly early on. I was able to cover the British Grand Prix for Radio Suffolk in 2013, and met John Surtees there, which is why John Surtees is included. And I wanted to tell that incredible story of 2 wheels to 4, because I just don't think we'll ever see it ever again. I think it's such a landmark to be quick in both. That's a story that appealed, and I tried to go in that direction in what would excite me. And I think being trackside to see Gilles Villeneuve race would have seriously appealed, because everyone who did retells those stories with a smile and a look of awe. And I think the one strand that I felt all the way through, from the very beginning to the final chapter about Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, is the driver. The world has changed, the technology has changed, what they're driving has changed, but the heroic aspect of the driver at the center, that is exactly the same as when we began in 1950.
What you were just discussing it actually. So much has changed over the 75 years. From jokes like, back when the tires were skinny and the drivers were fat, and now things are much different than that. You narrowed it down to 75. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I apologize ahead of time. But can you give me your top 3 changes, good or bad?
Ooh, top 3. Well, that's fantastic. I love this. Top three changes, good or bad. The safety aspect is absolutely vital, and feel free to jump in and disagree. But I found the Jackie Stewart account of having to sit there trapped in the wreckage, not knowing if you're about to burn to death. That is stark, and that is too stark for sport. As much as we love the romantic vision of those cars of yesteryear, there is if a Formula One to still exist in the modern day, they had to go on a safety journey, and so that's a change for the absolute better. In terms of a negative, I was astonished by the politics in the early 2000s. So I was quite young watching in the early 2000s, and I was just marveling at existing and the joy of enjoying the race on a Sunday. You go back and revisit it, and they really were getting in each other's way. I mean, that then culminates in Indianapolis 2005. And, the politics overwhelming the ability to actually go racing is ridiculous. And it was ridiculous. And I found myself looking at the whole period of the championship going, no, you really got in each other's way at this point. This is where ego and politics had overwhelmed the spectacle at the center of it, and it really, I think they got a bit lost. In that period of time. And then I suppose the third change that we'd say is that not many sports, not many disciplines get a second wind like Formula One has been able to have in recent times. And I love the fact that we've got people who've been watching from the very start who can tell you every single fact, who, if you so happen in the heat of the moment to say the wrong thing on the broadcast, I'm not being facetious. I genuinely love the fact that there's someone out there who will go, you said 1978, you meant 1979. I love that about the knowledgeable base. And I also love the fact that we have so many people who've been drawn in, who wouldn't have been drawn in the past, that are now suddenly loving the sport that we know that is our favorite thing to read about and to hear the news and to see the technology and to see the designs and to see the drivers at the center of it. I just love that it's in the that races sell out, that everywhere feels like an occasion. When you're on the ground, and it doesn't matter where you go, there are no empty grandstands anymore. Everywhere feels vital, and I think that is an amazing thing for the championship to have in the modern age, and it's great being part of it. So rambly, but yeah, those are the top 3 off the top of my head.
Alex, with the new TV deal just announced for the U.S. with Apple TV and the success of Drive to Survive on Netflix, do you see the upward trajectory of Formula One continuing unabated?
Well, it's worth saying I have a direct conflict of interest with this answer because I work for F1 TV, and they pay a part of my salary. But I'll speak generally to the point that no sport has a right to exist. We're going to see that with every single sport out there in the next decades to come. With the shifting media landscape, you have to find a way to grow your audience and appeal to people that have been the absolute bedrock of your championship viewing figures, and bring new people in and spark interest. And Formula One has been able to do that in the last few years. And without a clear idea of how to attract new eyeballs and keep it exciting and relevant and feel like the thing that everyone fell in love with for the previous audience. Without that, no sport has a God-given right to exist. And even the most popular product, without the right direction in the next year, I mean, I think baseball is a great example in the States. Baseball is having to shift its entire media landscape to survive because of the shifting media landscape. So because of the way that so many of those deals were tied up with cable, if they don't shift it, it will not continue in the national prevalence that it currently holds. And it's the same thing with Formula One. When you're asking people to have so many different subscriptions in the future, and the future will be very, very, very soon. When you're asking people to do that, you've got to justify your sport's existence. And Formula One, I feel, in recent times has got a head start on that really nicely. And that's why we've had the second wind. I think for me, the concept of getting Formula One in front of new eyeballs, I think that concept is very sustainable. Whether it will always be done via a docu-series in the current form like Drive to Survive, no show is going to last forever. It's had an incredible run on Netflix. If you look at the shows that Netflix have commissioned for this amount of time, it is not a very, very long list. So the program makers are to be commended for that. But I think the concept of can you package something and put it in front of an audience that don't quite know it, aren't exposed to it, and can you make it appealing? Yeah, motor racing is appealing. It's exciting fast cars racing each other. The job is almost done for you. So can you put it in a format that appeals in front of a new audience? Yes. And I think I think that will continue to happen even after Drive to Survive has run its final episode.
He is Alex Jacques, and the book is Grid to Glory, 75 Milestone Formula One Moments. It's a good read. And Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on, chaps.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Now, PJ, you've been having a look at the story of Jim Clark. It's been well documented, and I think anybody who knows anything about motorsport history knows some of the things about the man. But you've been looking at a single particular year of that farmer's life, and that's 1965, which is horrible to think is 60 years ago. Because for me, at least, I mean, you two are both younger than I am, but for me, I can remember it as if it was yesterday. It was maybe the best, he was maybe the best ever driver at that top level.
Very much so, and I think possibly the best ever year for a driver at that top level. You know, Formula One champion for the second time, Indy 500 winner. He won 3 other championships, and again, almost always racing against the best driver in those categories. And he won the very first Grand Prix of the year. And I do love throwing this as a bit of trivia out, and I'm not going to do it to you, gentlemen, but I'm going to have a little pause when I say it. So, when was the first Grand Prix of 1965? It was January the 1st. January the 1st.
You've asked me that before.
I know, but stop and think about what that means. That means that they actually did the qualifying, and there was pre-qualifying because it was oversubscribed. Lots of local entries happened the year before. Which, you know, it's only when I was putting my notes together I went, hang on a minute. But yeah, you know, it was quite a notable race. It was actually Jackie Stewart's first Grand Prix, and he scored points for 6th place. It was the first Grand Prix for Goodyear, but it was the first win of the year for Jim Clark, and he won it on January the 1st in the Lotus 33 at the South African Grand Prix at East London. And, you know, that's starting the season. And the amazing thing is, he didn't do another Grand Prix for 6 months, because that's how the calendar worked at the time. There's one little tweak to that, but we'll get to. But between that, you had everyone was in the Southern Hemisphere, and they did what they did in those days, and they headed across to New Zealand and Australia for the Tasman Series, 15 races. And Clark won 10 of them in that Lotus 32B and took that title. He actually won at Pukekohe just a week after the South African Grand Prix. And in fact, you know, he was very, very successful in that series. And the series is fascinating because it ran to the old Formula One rules. They had 2.5 litre engines when Formula One was just running one engine. And Jim won 11 of the 16 races. And he sealed title with a second place at Sandown on the 21st of February. And he loved the Tasman Series. It was for a start, you were over there in summer, so the weather was fantastic. There was plenty of time to do activities between the racing and everything, enjoying the good weather. And he even actually learnt to fly while there. So, Colin Chapman, I think, was already flying around Europe or everything. And Jim actually got his license and learnt to fly while he was doing the Tasman series. So, again, that was all over by the 7th of March. He did the final. He actually stayed on for a non-championship race and was disqualified from it for drinking alcohol after the race in the pit lane celebrating. And in fact, it was only when the second place driver, Frank Gardner, basically said to the organisers, unless you reinstate him, I'm never racing in Queensland again, that Jim was given the win back. But yeah, fascinating. So, a start to it. And by the before the end of February, he'd already got one title in the bag.
Wow.
So you're telling me that he got disqualified in the Tasman series?
No, this was a non-championship race right at the end. He stayed on for. It was the Tasman cars, but this one didn't count towards the championship. He won the race, but they tried to disqualify him for having had a drink in the pit lane after the race.
I've been to New Zealand, and they drink.
Well, this was Queensland, and I don't know what they were up to. But
Well, that's a penal colony. Come on.
Yeah, there's probably still a law against it, definitely.
We have dry counties here, but
That's right. So we had the Tasman series in the bag. Yes, he was racing a lot, but let's look at that Indy 500 win in that Lotus 38. This was the last day of May. It was already his 32nd race of the season, and in fact, most of May was actually taken up by being at Indy anyway. So he didn't really race that much in May. He missed the Monaco Grand Prix because it clashed with the Indy 500. In fact, Jim and Dan Gurney both wanted to do both events, but USAC at the time had a rule about not racing anywhere else within 24 hours of being in one of their events, so they could not pull that off. He won the Indy. He was actually the first non-American winner for 46 years, and only the fourth ever at that point. Previous one had actually been Dario Resta back in 1919, who was actually born in Italy but was actually British. We're going to take that all the way, basically.
Yeah.
And he won it in a sunbeam. But Jim was forever polite and not a great one for the limelight. And about 3 weeks after the race, he said, "I'm only just beginning to realise I won the race. I remember the crowds cheering, the interviews, and typical Jim Clark. Oh, the interviews is how he phrased it, and the wild claims of all the money they had won. And in fact, counting the prize money, including money for laps led, Lotus walked away with $166,000, £59,000 in British money, which, if you actually calculate that up for today's money, is £1.4 million. This is why they went it. This is why they didn't go to the Monaco. That's big money. Admittedly, $32,000 of that had to go on tax. But that is big money, and that's why you don't do the Monaco Grand Prix if you can come home with £1 million of prize money, effectively. Colin Chapman again. So, by the end of May, we're already Tasman champion and Indy 500 champion. And the day after that Indy win, Jim was in Detroit with the Ford top brass, and apparently Jim, being Jim, charmed them within minutes just by being his ordinary self, no airs and graces, had lunch with Henry the Ford II, Leo Beebe, etc. And Indy in the week after almost just sum up how intense the first part of that year was for Jim, because he went to Detroit straight after Indy, then went up to Canada to race the Lotus 30 sports car at Mossport in the Players 200 sports car race, only to break a drive shaft at the start of the first heat, so took no further part in the meeting. Promptly jumped on a plane, flew back across the Atlantic, and was at Crystal Palace on the Monday morning because it was a bank holiday, and was racing there, and actually won both heats of the London Trophy Formula 2 race in style, winning the whole event on aggregate, and was second in the Lotus Cortina in the saloon race.
I also think, Paul, we shouldn't lose sight of how important that Indy win was to the event itself. As you said, it was a very American-centric event up until that point. The controversy in '64, but Jim dominating in '65 really changed the face of that event, and it proved to all the stuff shirts in USAC and the American Midwest that the days of the Roadster were over, and it was time to get on the bandwagon, as it were, and get with the program and come up with their own rear-engine race cars, which they did, and it changed that event for the better forever. And so I think that as we look back on this awesome season, we shouldn't lose sight, at least from my perspective as an American, and the most American of races, the Indy 500, how important it was that Jim won that year, because that paved the way for the Dario Franchittis and the Ari Lyondikes and all of these, the Tony Kanans from Brazil. All of these international stars knew they could find a home at the Indianapolis 500, and it was Jim really who with his victory, he of course from Graham Hill, but for some reason Clark's victory in '65 was the seminal event that heralded the coming of the new era.
And I sometimes wonder if that's almost due to Jim himself in a way, because you could perceive it as Lotus coming in and leaving with the money. But again, all the drivers, your AJ Foyts, just were never a bad word to say about him. What a lovely guy he was, so unassuming. All the not this fancy European thinking he's the bee's knees coming across. He had to do rookie tests when he first went there. But yeah, I think it was just he was just Jim. He was just this ordinary guy who'd probably rather be back on his farm and could drive race cars very, very quickly.
And that hit home with the Midwestern ethos that was the Indy 500 at that time. The down home, the farmer, all of that. Plus, by '65, he really was renowned for his ability. Everybody knew this guy could pedal, and he proved it on the grandest stage at the time in America, the Indianapolis 500. And yeah, guys like Foyt took him. And I'm not saying that Graham Hill was in any way not that way. He was also very quickly accepted. But Jim really was the man who got along with that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's because of his personality.
Yeah, which is something that comes through whenever you read about him. Everybody liked him. He might have been the best, and most of the drivers accepted that, but everybody liked Jim.
Now, Paul, the Formula One drivers, or let's give them their proper title for those times, which is Grand Prix drivers, didn't earn huge amounts back in those days. You said about the Indy purse, which is probably about 5 times what Jim would have won for the whole of the rest of his racing season put together. But
easily,
they didn't earn huge sums, and so therefore they had to supplement their income whenever they could. In Jim Clark's time, the top racing drivers would be happy to jump from car to car at all sorts of race meetings. You've talked about flying back to Crystal Palace for a Formula 2 race, that kind of thing. But with people like Jim, was he worried about being beaten by an amateur or being beaten by somebody who perhaps wasn't expected to beat him?
I don't think so at all, because the quote that I saw was effectively along the lines of, you race that many cars because that's how you made the money as a driver. And Easter weekend, Goodwood, 19th of April, he won the St Mary's Trophy in the Lotus Cortina, so saloon car race, by 11 seconds and passed Mike Salmon's Mustang on the opening lap. He then went and won the Sunday Mirror Trophy, a Formula One race, and he won it from Graham Hill. And it was the final actual competitive Formula One race at Goodwood, and they set a lap record. In fact, this is back in the days when you only timed to a tenth, so they both did a lap of a 1 minute 20.4. So you can picture that as hand timing, isn't it? And this wasn't just the Clark and Hill having a little battle. This was a strong entry. Ferrari had sent 2 cars. John Surtees and Lorenzo Bandini were out for Ferrari. And then later in the day, he won the Lavant Cup for sports cars in the Lotus 30 by 20 seconds. He raced so much. I did what anyone would do in these circumstances, and I put a spreadsheet together, because that's what you do, isn't it, when you've got lots of data like this?
No, it isn't what we do.
Oh, don't you stop.
Well, it's what you do.
Well, all right, it's what I do. If you've got a spreadsheet, you've got a friend. And I've got it all wonderfully listed out. That was meant with irony. I literally, unless I've got something wrong, and I've been quite careful with this, I actually make it one weekend between that first win on the first day of the year And the 1st of May, when he raced at Alton Park, and then he didn't race in May till the last day of May because he was in Indianapolis the whole time. So between the 1st of January, and the 1st of May, there was one weekend he wasn't racing somewhere. And I know people today talk about, it's a 20-race Formula One season. And I appreciate, it's many days at the sake. Yeah, he had one weekend off between the 1st of January and the 1st of May. And, in all that racing, let's remember, only one of them was for a World Championship Grand Prix.
It's interesting, isn't it, that he was as busy in 1965 as a racing driver as you've been in 2025 as a race commentator.
I think he got in more than me, to be quite honest. I think I worked out I've spent 33 days at motorsport events this year. But then again, I'm not travelling around the world. And let's remember, he flew back from Mosport to come to Crystal Palace. This is in the days of, this is not the wide-body jets, the 747s. This would have been maybe a Boeing 707, 2 seats. There's no first-class luxury little things to have a little sleep on. This was travelling rough by the standards of today.
Except you did get your meals on the silver service, and you did get somebody with coming around with a trolley serving you your meal.
Can I adjust your face mask, sir?
So only one Formula One Grand Prix, as they were at the time, in that period. When did so? I guess the summertime was when, what we would call a summertime, June forward, was really when the Grand Prix calendar kicked off, wasn't it?
It's a strange one when you look back. There were actually only 9 Grand Prix counting towards the World Championship anyway. And you had the one on the 1st of January.
Simpler times.
Exactly. Now that paid off for Jim, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we raced at South Africa on the 1st of January. Next one was Monaco, clashed with Indy end of May. But then 2 weeks later, after that, it really was back to Formula One, as Jim went to Spa for the second week of June and won that one in the 33. So his second Grand Prix was 6 months on from his first Grand Prix of the season, and then they were thick and fast, because 2 weeks later he won at Clermont-Ferrand in the French Grand Prix, and 2 weeks after that won at Silverstone, and the Silverstone Grand Prix was on a Saturday. So what does Jim do? The next day he goes, probably that evening, he went straight across to France and won a round of the French Formula 2 Championship at Rouen in the Lotus 35 Formula 2 car the day after winning the British Grand Prix. And a week after Rouen, so just 1 week now, he wins at Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix. 1st of August, we're already at the Nürburgring. He takes his 6th win of the season in his 6th Grand Prix of the season. And let's remember, cars were way less reliable in those days. And of course, only 9 races. And at that period, you counted your best 6 scores. So in fact, he won the title on the 1st of August at the Nürburgring, having won 6 races. So he had a perfect score. It's the only time it's actually been done. And the scoring system worked for him. And it also turned out to be absolutely fantastic timing, as he failed to finish any of the remaining races of the year. This reliability thing again. So great timing from that. And and it's the first day of August, and he's Tasman champion, he's Indy 500 winner, and he's already Formula One world champion for the second time.
You almost think that would have been like a mic drop moment.
Yeah,
I'm done. Okay,
that's all.
I'm gonna go back and milk some cows now.
No, but more to come.
No.
More to come. By this point, he's actually had 47 races and a whole variety of cars, and he's won 29 of them. And, I did mention a couple of times the Formula 2 outings. Well, he won the British Autocar Formula 2 Championship. He won the Trophée de Formula 2 in France, the French Formula 2 Championship. So another 2 championships to add to his tally. And in the British Saloon Car Championship, he didn't win a race outright, but he took his class in the Lotus Cortina, remembering that he was up against a lot of big V8s and everything at this point in time. And he even won in the Lotus 30 sports car, which was a very unloved car. You had to be, I think, a bit special to tug that thing around to a win. And even its replacement, the Lotus 40, wasn't the greatest. And he actually won in the Lotus 40, but was disqualified for outside assistance. And all in all, and according to my spreadsheet, it's 31 wins in 8 different cars from 56 races. And I do want to say at this point that you have to be very, very careful counting how many races he did, because a lot of the British races, particularly some of the Formula 2s, were heats and a final. and a final result. And you look at it and it looks like 3 races, but the final result is actually the aggregate of the 2 heats, not 2 heats leading into a final. So quite often on a race day, there are 3 results, but only for 2 races. So hopefully I have winnowed all those out. And it's just, it's in such different cars. It's like the class wins in the Locus Cortina. How do you equate that to today? It's like Lewis Hamilton popping in and doing some British Touring Car Championship races for fun.
Mr. Tarsey, this is why he does spreadsheets. Without a spreadsheet, you might have made that mistake.
Oh, I'll send it across. It's got a couple of nice pivot tables.
I stand.
Yeah, I've never known anybody, Jim, who has a love affair with the spreadsheet more than PJ. It's I'm sure.
Instead of counting 3, he counted 2, which, without the spreadsheet, if it was just my fingers, I'd have messed it up.
It was. So what are we? We're Tasman champion, we're Indy 500 champion, we're Formula 1 champion, we're a double Formula 2 champion. And, you'd almost think, you mentioned it earlier on Jim, that would be the mic drop moment and everything. But, no way could I find any mention of Jim actually thinking that, that was it, or what else can I do to beat that? And he said, it's just, I just love racing cars. I just love racing cars of different types and as many different types as I can. It's just, it doesn't mind what they are. He just loved racing them. And, of course, he had the next year to look forward to in Formula 1 when it was going up to 3 litres from the 1.5 litre cars. And, he carried on despite not having access to a decent engine and was his usual quiet, reserved self, happy to get part. And, we said about what a nice guy he is. And there's one little piece I found tucked away in one of the references, David Tremaine's Jim Clark book. Please just go and read it. It's an awesome book. But to sum Jim up, there was a celebration parade around his hometown. We've already mentioned it, of Duns. They found an open-topped bus, got Jim up on the top shelf, and it was the local boy in front of the people who really did matter to him. And he had a friend, David Hodges, who he'd worked with. David Hodges had been a farming advisor to him on the farm. And although apparently they'd spent most of the time in the kitchen talking motor racing and eating scones made by his Jim Clark's mum. But David had been very, very ill for most of the year, and Jim had actually been checking on his progress from around the world, just seeing how he was and everything. And after checking with doctors, it was okay. Jim had the celebration bus change its route, stop outside David Hodges' house. He got off it, he knocked on the front door, and had a long chat with his friend. And David Hodges sums it up. He said, Jim was that sort of person. He went all around the world, but he didn't leave. He didn't leave Berwickshire at all.
That's a lovely sentiment. Just one of those things that you said there about tending his sheep, Paul, was that Kenny McLean told us when we were at the museum that this myth has grown up about Jim being a sheep farmer, which he was, and that there were sheep on the farm, but predominantly it was cattle. And that the story has grown and grown as Jim being the sheep farmer, but actually J. Clark and Son Limited, which was the name of the business that he ran with his father, was actually predominantly a cattle farm, not a sheep farm.
That's fantastic. I'd have steered it, one for our American friends there, in a different direction if I'd known that.
Oh no. Oh no!
Thus,
all I can say is
milking the cows. Thus, by milking the cows references, I learned from our friend.
Hey, I missed out on this trip, still having a day job.
Yes, you were missed. We did talk about you a lot, but not necessarily in a good way. But,
do you know what? I'll take that.
So that museum, just going back to talking about it, it's a very interesting one because it's not huge by a long way. It's an extension on what used to be the council offices in Duns, but it's something which it's just jam packed with everything, isn't it, Jim?
And it's just like the man, understated.
Yes.
Elegant and very well done.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going into it thinking that, it's a bit like the old Donington Museum, that there's rows and rows and rows of cars, there aren't. There are 3 cars, and there's no space for any more than 3 cars. They do tend to change them around from time to time. When we were there was a Lotus 23, similar to the ones they ran at Le Mans. There was the Indy winner, and there was a Lotus Cortina. But it's full of other stuff. And Kenny joined us for dinner after we'd been to the museum, and I just love this, that he arrived and said, I thought we ought to have a centerpiece for the table, and pulled out of his holdall the Lady Wigram trophy from the Tasman series, which sat in the middle of the table for the evening, which just, I mean, if ever there was a Jim Clark appropriate story, it's that.
It is. And he won it 3 years out of 4, didn't he? I mentioned he won it in 65. He also won it in 67 and, of course, 68, sadly, shortly before his crash at Hockenheim.
Yes, and that this was the 65 trophy, and a beautiful thing. I grew up reading my motorsport magazine about the races in Australia and New Zealand and the Tasman trophy, and there it was sitting within touching distance, and I did try and get it under my coat when Kenny left, but unfortunately he realised what I'd done. But I know this is turning into a glorified advertisement for the Jim Clark Museum, but it really is a brilliant time, and we can't thank them enough for all of that. But it was good, and thank you, Paul, for your piece there, scrupulously researched and spreadsheeted.
Well, I have to say that I was fortunate enough to be doing paddock tours at the Goodwood Revival, where we had a display of Jim Clark cars. So I actually got to pretty much tell that story, stood in front of some of the actual cars to a whole variety of guests over the 3 days. And I have to say, it was a highlight just to suddenly put your hand out and downwards and say, this is the Lotus 38 that he won Indianapolis in. This is the Lotus 33 that he won at XYZ in. This is the Formula 2 car. Yeah, it's special. It's very special to me.
Yeah, I think you started by saying about if you know your motorsport, then Jim Clark's up on the list, and I'd go along a parallel route and say, hey, if you haven't got a lump in your throat when you talk about these kind of things, then you're not a true petrol head. And that it was great. Thank you, Paul. That was a great insight.
Don't forget, there are 3 ways you can enjoy our historic racing news content. Join our Facebook community and stay up to date on all the historic motorsports news, as well as some, not so serious content. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles. Not only can you find back episodes of our historic racing news podcast, you can find bits from our archives, auction reports, and follow our Racing Icon series. Episode 1 tells the story of the car that proved IMSA's GTP concept was a winner, the Lola T600. The Historic Racing News podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to tune in December as Paul Tarsey brings us the results from the annual RAC Book Awards, and we'll hear from some of the winners. We'll also preview some must-have items for your favorite Petrolheads Christmas list and preview some more of Race Retro for 2026. You don't want to miss it.
We've been all around the world, gentlemen, haven't we? We've been to Australia and New Zealand and the US and all sorts of places, as well as all the European and UK talk. I'd like to thank Gabes Ewbank from Race Retro for coming on the show and telling us all about what can happen there. Kenny McLean from the Jim Clark Museum, and to Peter McNaughton for making that visit possible. Thanks to Jodi Ellis, John Nickas, and Neil Smith for talking about the Yanks at Le Mans, and to Alex Jacques, who told us about his new book, Grid to Glory. Of course, I must also thank my usual gruesome twosome, Paul Jurd, and the man who also produces the show, Jim Roller. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as usual. But most importantly, thank you for joining us. As always, if you have been, thank you very much for listening.